Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the Doing What Matters podcast. I am your host, Teresa McCloy, and it is great to be back with you on another episode of talking about setting up a way of doing life so that you can live from rest, not rush. And so on today's episode, I actually want to dive into some true confessions. And those true confessions are around the fact that the last few months, I feel like I've been living with my hair on fire. I talk about this phrase in the book that I put out last year called Doing What Matters. This idea of living with your hair on fire, living in a place where you feel like things are coming at you from all angles, that you're living from rush, that everything is just external. And you can't keep all the balls in the air. You've all seen that little graphic, that little meme of trying to juggle all the things. And I want to confess to you, I have been living there for the last few months, actually probably the last 6 months or so. And strangely enough, I didn't think I would ever be here again, but here I am. So I want to talk with you about how I get myself out of this pattern of behavior today, because maybe you're there too. Maybe you're in that place where you just want to throw it all out and start over. And I want to give you hope. You don't have to throw it all out. So let's dive in and let's talk about how to reset if you're living with your hair on fire. So here's what's happened in the last 6 months that kind of brought me to this place. And I've had some realization of these patterns of behaviors that can happen. And for me, about 6 months ago, we started really heavily purchasing another company. I've been doing some adjusting on my team. My daughter actually works for me. She went on maternity leave. So that meant that, yes, we have a new grandbaby. I've talked about that here on the podcast. And there's just been a lot of shifting and changing in my life. And all of it's just kind of come to this place. We've also done a new structure in my business as well, in how we're doing some certification programs and different things. So a lot of moving parts. All things, some of them out of my control, some of them in my control. And this is not anything new. This is something that has happened in my life before. And I'll be honest that I don't really want to admit that I had gotten as far down the rabbit hole as I've gotten, because here I am, the person who talks about this stuff and teaches about this stuff. And yet here I was. And I knew about a month ago that I was there. But one of the things that I teach and that I talk about is doing something called a 90-day reset. And I've talked about this in previous episodes here on the podcast, but doing a 90-day reset is a way of every 90 days getting up on the balcony of your life, including personal and professional, and saying, I just want to press pause for whether it's a few hours, whether it's an entire day, whether it's a couple of days, and just stand up above everything and look down and say, what's working, what's not working, what do I see that I need to do going forward? And it's really the process that I teach, these ways of both being and doing. And I had really lost a little bit of traction around who I wanted to be. So just this last week or so, I've really been leaning into the 90-day reset. And I knew that I wanted to take time, actually just this past weekend, and get up on the balcony and do some thinking. And I have a whole way that we structure this 90-day reset, asking yourself, some deeper questions and some deeper things. And I kind of want to walk you through that process, because sometimes just saying, okay, what could I do? what would be helpful for me to do to reset life? Because kind of our gut reaction many times is to just say, I'm just going to stop it all and I'm going to start all over. And yet there's so much that we could learn if we would just pause and say, okay, what is working? What is not working? What do I want to set aside for right now? What do I want to move forward with? And so let me just take this opportunity to walk you through kind of what are some of those big rock things that you could do if you feel like me, you're living with your hair on fire. This was such an awakening for me several years ago. And I had to come up with a process, a real life process that I could use over and over again. Now, in spiritual language, I call that a rule of life. And I had gotten away a little bit from my rule of life. What's interesting is I noticed that I did not do a really good 90-day reset at the end of the second quarter of the year. So back in March, April, May, I didn't really do a good reflection time. And then, here comes June, July, August. Didn't do a great one, in the summer. And so it just continued to build up. So let me take you through some of these big questions that I ask and things that I look at when I do a reset. And my goodness, I feel so different here on this Monday morning to come in and go, okay, I've said some yeses, I've said some nos, and I'm ready to jump into this last part of the year with some really good ways that I'm going to show up and lean into and give myself some margin and yet feel like I'm really going to move forward in some positive ways. So let me walk you through these things. So the first thing I have to do to reset myself is really get in touch with the being part of myself. Who am I at my deepest core? I often use that example of the triangle building my real self. Who am I? That's at the bottom because that's where my life in the everyday ordinary is going to come through. And what, God gives me as moments in my life where I see him and I notice in those everyday things. And then my work sits on top of that. But I have to reconnect with my being. And I have to take a breath and I have to sit and I have to think, what in my being, what are my needs? What are my values? What is my life statement about? What are the big rocks in my life that matter to me? And this weekend, I was reviewing those things. I call them areas of focus. But what are the areas in my life that I'm focusing on? And, things like my self-care, my extended family, my family, hobbies. There's all kinds of different areas that you might have, but I need to always remind myself about those things. I need to say, these are the things that matter to me. This is how I want to live my life. These are the people that matter to me. These are the ways that I connect spiritually that matter to me. Once I kind of review that, then I'm ready to move into more of the doing. And I think this is what happens so many times when we're feeling this external pressure is we don't take the pause to connect to our deeper innermost selves. So once I've done some of that, and I might do that separately than even the doing part. For me, many times I need to just spend some time in the being over a week or so, remembering. And then I go back and I look at, I have a document that I teach our clients to use called a real life view. And I go back and I look at that real life view document, the being side, the who am I side, where I've captured a bunch of those things about myself, my real true self, and I've written them down. And once I read through that and I reconnect, I always just feel like I can take a breath. Okay, now I remember what matters to me and I can move forward. So then the next thing that I do is I look at those areas and I say, as I discern kind of, okay, between now and the next 90 days, the next 2.5 to 3 months, what are the couple of areas that really stand out for me that I have some work to do in? And by work, I mean that I want to make some forward progress and motion in. And this is the part that I had kind of ignored for the last couple of months and hadn't done a deep enough dive on. And I was starting to really feel it in my body, in my mind, just hair on fire. That's the way I know how to describe it. And so when I look at those areas, there's usually one or two that stand out for me. Now, often as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, there are several things around the professional side that stand out for me. And there's lots of things I can do there. But I want to encourage you, and I have to tell myself this too, to not forget about the other things, to not forget about the people, to not forget about the spiritual growth and the self-care and the soul care part of self. So for me, one of the recognitions I have is physically taking care of myself and the attention that I'm going to need to give that in the next 2 to 3 months, and making sure that I have enough margin in my days to give that attention. And so when I think about that area of my life and then my professional life, um, there's not a lot else left over, if that makes sense. I have to identify, though, that this is a big rock that matters for me in the next few months. Now, that doesn't mean other things don't, but if I really want to make progress on my health care, I have to say that it matters in the next few months. Then it can move into actually what I talked about last week on the podcast, which is it can become a routine and it can become a rhythm. But when it comes to self-care, I have to create some really good routines and I have to give it some focus. So when I talk about that second step of saying, what are the things that matter to me? It is saying, what in these areas of focus, these 7 to 8 big rocks in my life, what do I need to give attention to in the next 90 days? Now, many of you that listen are business owners, so there will be one or two things professionally. And depending on if you have a team, there might even be more than one or two things because each person on your team might have something that they're working on moving forward. Some big rock that you need around your business, something new that you're creating that's going to take some research and some times to set up, some key performance indicators or standard operating procedures or whatever that might be in your business that need to move forward. But don't forget about the being part too. Those areas of your life, like time with family, time with friends. Right now, when I'm recording this episode, we're moving into the holiday season. So I wanted to look at how do I want to spend the holidays? What travel do I have planned? How do we want to do some of these bigger things as a family? And think about them and plan ahead for them. Another step in this reset for me is thinking about people. As I was just talking here about what people are going to be important in the next 90 days. And again, I can be guilty of if I don't do this process regularly and I don't look ahead and I don't pre-decide that time that I'm going to spend with those important people, some of those relationships get left out that matter to me. The other thing that I noticed in doing my reset this time is I actually have been saying yes to too many people. And so I am a community builder. I love deep relationships, but I'm actually saying yes to too many groups and too many activities. And I needed to cut back. So I made some hard decisions and actually even made one of those contacts today to say, I need to step back. I need to step away from this group for a season. And maybe you're sitting there right now too, looking ahead in the next 3 months going, I need to do the same. That is really working in that people part of your life, which is so important and so much about what matters. But where do you need to say yes? And where do you need to say no? And what is God inviting you to in deep relationships and in other places where no matter how much you desire it, it can't go as deep as you want and you need to step back from? So I have to reset around taking care of myself. I call those present blocks, the time that I'm putting in that I'm going to be present, being with the right people in the next 90 days that I need to give attention to. And I hadn't been doing that reset of that. And then what are the things both personally and professionally that I need to work on in the next 90 days? What are the big rocks that I want to move forward? One of the things for me, just to give you an example, is moving back into my home. We've been in a major remodel for the last year, which is actually what's caused some of this chaos that I felt in my life. But I'm moving back into my home this fall, and I'm excited about thinking about decorating my home for the holidays and creating that environment for myself again. And that's one of my projects, is just coming around in this next 90 days and resetting my home space. And I'm excited about that. So what might have been a huge distraction for you that you need to say, no, I need to move forward with this project? And once you've done all of that, you've really connected with the being, you've looked at present, what you want to be present to in your own self, what you want to be present to professionally, what are the people that matter in the next 90 days. All of this is looking forward. Then I want to invite you to start to look then at your calendar, your everyday life, and just say, what times do I want to pre-decide on my calendar now? Who do I need to reach out to and talk to about upcoming holiday plans and those types of things? Even though it's only October, how proactive could you be to get some of those set in place? And then maybe go out and block a time in the next week after you've done some of this balcony thinking, and do some things like spend a few hours just cleaning up your desktop, cleaning out some files, maybe cleaning off your desk, wherever it is that you kind of land and do a lot of your work. Maybe you need to reset and clean up some things in your task management, or get out a new calendar or a new planner and start some things fresh. File some things where they're supposed to be. Clean some things up. I did a lot of that this weekend. I have a tendency to, things get piled up and they don't get filed where they need to go in Dropbox or Google Drive or all the things that we store and put information in, both personally and professionally. Block out some time on your calendar and give yourself an hour or two to just work in your environment, in whatever space that is, and clean it up a little bit. So as you move into these last 8, 10, 12 weeks of the year, you feel fresh and clean, and it feels good to sit down and do the work. I don't know about you, but I don't like to work in messiness and chaos. And if that is what is holding you back, just block out some time and reset that space and that environment. So this is where I was. I was hair on fire. I was not feeling settled. And if you have that feeling, maybe you're right there with me and you need to reset, I give you permission. It doesn't have to be at the first of the month. It doesn't have to be, you can reset anytime. Take a few hours, take a day. Don't throw it all out and say, I don't know how to move forward. I'm stuck. I'm procrastinating. but really just give yourself permission to say, I'm going to take a few hours. I'm going to get up on the balcony. I'm going to look at all this, what's working, what's not. I'm going to call it clean, and I'm going to start from here. I do this kind of work all the time. I teach this kind of work, and yet I too need to do it. And I had gotten to a place where I wasn't doing it as deep as I needed to, and it was catching up with me. And so maybe you're there too. So I just want to leave you with encouragement that once you do a few of these things, it really just opens up space for you to have more joy, create more impact into your business and your life. And so I just encourage you, I'd love to hear from you. If you're like, yep, I needed to call a truce and I needed to do a reset to start over and decide what really mattered to me. So, hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Doing What Matters podcast. I'm here each and every week, live, doing life right along with you so that I can live from a place of rest, not rush. I'd love to hear from you. You can check us out at thereallifeprocess.com. You can email me at Teresa@thereallifeprocess.com. And I'd love to hear how you're setting up the rest of your year for success on your terms, living life from rest, not rush. Remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment in it. And when we make space for it by clearing out some of the clutter and resetting, we get to see those moments in our lives. So have a great week, everyone. We'll be back next week. This was me being real, being honest with you about even my own journey to live into the real life process. Have a great week. We'll see you back next week with more of Doing What Matters.